My fiancé and my sister betrayed me with a pregnancy 1 week before my wedding. My parents defended them and kicked me out. But when she was dying of cancer years later, what I did left them speechless. I'm 32 years old. I work as an events manager at a hotel, and until recently, I thought I could never forgive what they did to me. The thing is, when I was 26 years old, my fiancé and my younger sister basically destroyed my entire life. And for a long time, a really long time, all I felt was pure hatred. But anyway, I guess I should start from the beginning because what happened after? Everything that came years later is something I'm still trying to process. I met Brian when I was 23. We worked in the same building and we'd run into each other all the time at the Starbucks on the corner. He was one of those guys who makes you laugh effortlessly, you know? And after like 3 months of running into each other casually, although I think he got there early on purpose, he finally asked me out. We dated for 3 years before he proposed, and when he did, it was perfect. Like exactly how I'd imagined it. On the beach at sunset with that whole romantic vibe, I called my family crying. With happiness, my best friend Heather, I've known her since kindergarten, literally, started screaming on the phone, and my sister Courtney, who was 22 at the time, seemed super excited for me. That's the key word. Courtney was always the baby of the family. And I don't mean that in an endearing way. My parents spoiled her whole life, like she could do whatever she wanted, and there were never any consequences. I was the responsible one, the one who got good grades, the one who had a stable job, and she was the one who could come home at 4 in the morning and my parents would barely say anything to her. Growing up, I always felt there was a difference in how they treated us, but I never thought it would lead to what it led to. Never in a million years would I have imagined that my own sister would be capable of something like that. After Brian proposed to me, we started planning the wedding. We wanted something in spring, like in 6 months. Nothing too big but nice. You know, with our families and close friends. Brian and Courtney knew each other, obviously. They'd been at several family gatherings together, Christmas dinners, birthdays, that kind of thing. I'd see them talking sometimes and didn't think anything weird. They were my sister and my future husband. They were supposed to get along. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. There were little things, like the way she always dressed up extra when she knew Brian was going to be at some family event, or how she suddenly started asking me a lot about him, like what he liked, what he didn't like, stuff like that. I thought she was just trying to get to know my future husband better because we were family. But no, that wasn't it at all. The thing is that like 3 weeks after the engagement, Courtney started showing up more often when Brian and I went out. At first it was casual, like, oh, I was just passing by, I'll join you guys for coffee, that kind of thing. Then she started texting Brian, directly, supposedly to ask him things about surprises for me, or to ask him for advice about I don't know what. I saw it as normal. Even nice that my sister and my fiancé got along well. How stupid I was. Seriously. Fast forward like 2 months. We were exactly 1 week from the wedding. 1 week. The guests had already confirmed. The dress was ready. The food was paid for. Everything was ready. And then my parents called me and told me they needed to talk to me and Brian urgently, that we should go to their house that night. My mom's tone was weird. Like that tone they use when something really bad happened, but they don't want to tell you over the phone. I asked her what was wrong, and she just said, "Just come, please. We need to all talk together." We got to my parents' house around 7 at night, and Courtney was already there, sitting on the couch with red eyes like she'd been crying. My mom and dad were super serious, and I started thinking that maybe someone had died or something. My dad told us to sit down, and I remember I squeezed Brian's hand because I was nervous. Like really nervous. And then my dad said, "Courtney has something to tell you." And I looked at my sister, not understanding anything. Courtney started crying, like that dramatic crying she always did when she wanted attention, and said between sobs that she was pregnant. My first reaction was surprise, obviously, but also like, well, okay, she's young, but it's not the end of the world. We'll support her. But then my mom said something I didn't process immediately. She said, "She's 9 weeks pregnant. 9 weeks." I did the quick math in my head and realized that meant she'd gotten pregnant like 3 weeks after my engagement. And then, as if the information was arriving in slow motion to my brain, I looked at Brian. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were glued to the floor, and his face was completely pale. And in that moment, I knew. I just knew. I told him, "Brian, look at me." And he didn't. I said, louder, "Brian, look me in the eyes right now." And when he finally looked up, I saw it all on his face. The guilt, the fear, the confirmation of what my brain still refused to fully accept. I asked him directly, "Is it yours?" And he just nodded. He didn't even have the courage to tell me with words. I don't remember exactly what happened in the next few seconds. I know I stood up abruptly. I know there was a buzzing sound in my ears. And I know the only thing I could think was, this isn't happening. This can't be happening. I looked at Courtney and she kept crying, saying things like, "I'm so sorry. We didn't want it to happen. It just happened." All those stupid phrases people say when they do something unforgivable and want it to sound less horrible than it is. And my mom, my own mother, instead of being furious with them, instead of defending me, told me to try to calm down, to understand that these things happen, that Courtney was scared and needed family support. I exploded. I literally exploded. I yelled at my mom, how dare she ask me to calm down, that my sister and my fiancé had been cheating on me for weeks, that we were 1 week from the wedding. 1 week. I yelled at Brian, things I don't even remember exactly. I just know I told him he was a piece of trash person. How could he do this to me? And then I turned to Courtney and, I'm not proud of this, but it's what happened. I slapped her. I slapped her with all the strength I had, and she put her hand to her face and screamed, and my dad grabbed my arm and told me to leave the house, that he wasn't going to allow violence against his youngest daughter who was pregnant. I stood there staring at my family, at my dad who was literally kicking me out of the house for defending myself, at my mom who was hugging Courtney as if she was the victim, at Brian who still wasn't saying anything useful at all. I told them all to go to hell, that I didn't want to see them ever again in my life, and I left. I drove back to my apartment crying so hard I almost crashed twice, and when I got there, I just threw myself on the living room floor and screamed until my throat hurt. The next few days were horrible, like the worst days of my life. I had to cancel the wedding. I had to call all the guests. I had to return gifts. I had to explain to people what had happened. Heather came to stay with me that first week because I literally couldn't even get out of bed. Brian tried to call me like 1,000 times, sent messages, showed up at my apartment knocking on the door for hours. My parents also tried to contact me, saying we needed to talk as a family, that Courtney was very upset about all this. Courtney was upset. Her. As if she was the one who had lost something. 2 weeks after that family meeting from hell, I found out from an aunt that Brian and Courtney had gotten married, a private wedding, just with my parents and Brian's parents. They used the money that was supposedly for our wedding. Or so I heard. When I found out about that, something inside me broke completely. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was something deeper, something that felt permanent. I decided I needed to get out of there. Like completely. I couldn't be in the same city where at any moment I could run into them, where everyone knew what had happened. I requested a transfer at work to a city like 4 hours away, and I moved in less than a month. I thought leaving would help me, that the space and distance would give me the chance to heal, but it didn't work that way. I started drinking. At first it was just a glass of wine at night so I could sleep. Then it became 2 glasses, then half a bottle, then the whole bottle. Within months, I was drinking every day. Sometimes I'd start at midday, when I hadn't even finished working. My work performance obviously went down the toilet. I'd be late, sometimes I wouldn't show up, and when I was there, I couldn't concentrate. I was depressed, really depressed. Like I wouldn't shower for days, wouldn't clean my apartment, just existed in this constant fog of pain and alcohol. Heather called me all the time, worried, trying to convince me to get help, but I ignored her most of the time. I'd tell her I was fine, that I just needed time, but I wasn't fine at all. I got fired from my job like 8 months after I'd moved. My boss was kind about it, said he understood I was going through something difficult, but that they couldn't continue like that. He was right, obviously. Without a job, without income, and with depression that was eating away at my life, things got really dark. I ran out of money in less than 2 months. I couldn't pay rent, could barely buy food, and definitely couldn't keep buying alcohol like before, which honestly was the only good thing about being broke. I was about to be evicted from my apartment when Heather showed up unannounced, literally drove the 4 hours to get to where I was, knocked on my door, and when I opened it, and she saw the state of the apartment and the state I was in, she just hugged me and cried with me. Heather told me she was going to take me with her, that she was going to help me, and I didn't have the energy to argue. I packed the little I had that was worth saving, and left with her back to our hometown. I was never supposed to go back there, but I had no options. Heather had a 2-bedroom apartment and let me stay in the extra bedroom, didn't charge me anything, just asked me to promise I was going to try to get better, that I was going to seek real help. The next 8 months living with Heather were the hardest but also the most important of my life. I started therapy, quit drinking completely, which was horrible the first few weeks, looked for work, and slowly, very slowly, started to feel like maybe I could survive this. Heather was there every step of the way, like literally, when I felt like giving up, when the urge to drink was too strong, when the pain came back in waves that felt like they were going to drown me. She's the only reason I'm alive today. Honestly, during all that time, like 2 full years, I didn't hear anything from my family. 0 contact. I didn't know how Courtney was, if she'd already had the baby, nothing. And honestly, I didn't want to know. I was focused on myself, on healing, on rebuilding my life from scratch. I got a new job at a hotel as an events coordinator. It wasn't the same as what I had before, but it was something. And I was good at it. I started making new friends, going out again, feeling like maybe, just maybe, my life hadn't ended completely. And then, like 2 years after the whole initial disaster, I got a call from a mutual friend telling me that Brian had died in a car accident. I was in complete shock. Apparently, he'd lost control of the car on a wet road. The car flipped several times, and he was in the hospital for 4 days before dying. The news hit me in a way I didn't expect. I thought I hated him. And part of me did hate him. But I had also loved that man, had planned to spend my life with him. And knowing he was dead made me feel a different pain, a weird pain that mixed everything I'd felt for him. I went to his funeral but didn't announce myself. I stayed in the back, wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy, and watched from afar as Courtney cried, as my parents held her, as a little girl who I assumed was their daughter. My niece, technically, although I'd never met her, clung to my mom's leg without really understanding what was happening. I only stayed until they lowered the casket, and then I left before anyone could see me. I thought that would be the end of everything, that now Brian was dead and I could finally close that chapter completely and move on. But like 2 months after the funeral, my mom showed up at my door. I hadn't spoken to her in over 2 years. And suddenly she was there, with a little girl holding her hand. The girl was like 2.5 years old, almost 3, I think, had Courtney's brown hair and Brian's eyes, and was looking at me with curiosity, while my mom said my name, with that voice that tells you she's going to ask you something you don't want to hear. I asked her what she was doing there, and she asked if we could talk inside. I hesitated, but the girl was looking at me and it didn't seem right to have that conversation outside, so I let them in. My mom sat on my couch with the girl. Her name was Abigail, she told me, next to her, and then she dropped the bomb. Courtney had cancer. Glioblastoma. She said that word she could barely pronounce. A super aggressive brain tumor that gave her between 1 and 4 years to live, depending on how she responded to treatment. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction, like karma, justice, something like that. But I didn't feel that. I just felt a deep and complicated sadness. My mom kept talking, saying that Courtney was scared, that the treatments were horrible, that she was worried about Abigail. And then she got to the real point of her visit, and she asked me if I would consider adopting Abigail when Courtney died. I was silent for what felt like forever. I looked at the girl, who was playing with a doll my mom had brought, completely oblivious to the conversation we were having about her future. I asked my mom if she was serious. If she really thought that after everything that had happened, after they kicked me out of the house, after they chose Courtney over me at the worst moment of my life, I was going to raise her daughter. My mom started crying and said she knew she had no right to ask me that she knew they'd been terrible to me, but that Abigail was innocent in all this, that she was my niece, my blood. She said Brian's parents weren't in any condition to care for a child full-time. They were already older, and one had health problems, and that they, my parents, weren't young anymore either. I was 28 years old at that point. My mom said, I was young, stable. I could give Abigail a good life. I told them to leave. I told them I needed to think, that I couldn't have that conversation right now. My mom left me her number. He'd changed mine after moving, and they left. I spent the next few days in a kind of trance, thinking about everything. I talked to my therapist. I talked to Heather. I tried to process what it would mean to adopt the daughter of the people who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. After a week, I called my mom and told her no. I told her I couldn't do it, that I understood Abigail was innocent, but that I wasn't the right person for this, that I was still healing from what they'd done to me. My mom was disappointed. I could hear it in her voice, but she said she understood. But then she asked me if I could at least go see Courtney before it was too late, if I could give her the chance to apologize. I didn't want to do it. Honestly, every part of me said no, but something in her voice, or maybe the idea that my sister was dying, made me say yes. I went to my parents' house like a week later. It was the first time I'd entered that house in over 2 years. Courtney was in her old bedroom, which my parents had converted into a kind of hospital room. She looked terrible, had lost a lot of weight, had short hair. I later found out it had fallen out from chemo, and she cut it all off, and had that paleness that really sick people have. When she saw me, she started crying. She apologized to me, over and over and over, said she knew there was no excuse for what she'd done, that she'd been selfish and horrible, that she'd destroyed my life for nothing. She told me Brian never really loved her, that he always talked about me, that she knew he'd married her only because he felt it was the right thing after the pregnancy. She told me they'd been miserable together, that he never got over what he did to me, that she couldn't either. I asked her why she did it then, why if she knew all that she'd gone ahead with everything. She said she was jealous of me, that she always was, that I was the perfect daughter and she was always the disappointment, and that when she saw I had something so good with Brian, she wanted to ruin it. She wanted to prove she could have what I had. She was honest, brutally honest, and that somehow made things easier and harder at the same time. I didn't tell her she was forgiven because she wasn't, not completely. But I told her I understood, that I appreciated her honesty, and that I was sorry she was sick. Abigail came running into the room at some point and climbed onto the bed with Courtney, and I saw them together, my dying sister hugging her daughter, and something inside me softened a little. I started visiting them every 2 weeks or so. I didn't stay long, maybe an hour, but I went. Sometimes we just talked about random things. Sometimes we stayed quiet. Sometimes I played a little with Abigail. Courtney's treatments weren't working very well. You could see it in how she deteriorated more and more. The doctors started talking about palliative care. During those 3 years, because yes, it lasted 3 full years from when I saw her again until she died. Something changed in me. I can't say exactly what or when, but the hatred I'd been carrying for so long started to feel lighter. Seeing my sister die slowly, seeing this little girl who didn't understand why her mom was so sick, seeing my parents age under the weight of all this, made me realize that holding on to that hatred was only hurting myself. Courtney died exactly 3 years after that first visit. It was peaceful at the end. She was in her bed at my parents' house, surrounded by family. I was there, holding her hand, and she looked at me before closing her eyes and told me, "Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me this." She died like 2 hours later. At the funeral, Brian's parents approached me and told me they were going to take care of Abigail. They'd sold their house and moved to a smaller one near my parents so they could share the responsibility. They told me they understood if I didn't want to be very involved, but that if I wanted to, the doors were open. Now I visit Abigail like once a month. She's almost 6 years old. She's going to start school soon. I'm not her mom and I'm never going to be, but I guess I'm something like an aunt, a family friend. She knows who I am, knows I'm her mom's sister. Brian's parents are explaining things to her little by little, in an age-appropriate way. My parents and I have a cordial relationship now. Like we talk, I see them on visits with Abigail, but it's not what it was before, and probably never will be, and that's okay. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, doesn't mean everything goes back to how it was before. It just means you stop carrying the poison, that you let things be what they are. Heather is still my best friend, obviously. She says she's proud of how I handled all this in the end, although I'm not sure there's anything to be proud of. I just did what I could with a horrible situation. My therapist says forgiveness is a process, not an event. And I guess she's right because some days I still get angry when I think about everything that happened, about everything I lost. But most days, most of the time, I'm okay. I have a good job, good friends, a life I rebuilt from the ashes. It's not the life I planned to have when I was 26 and excited to get married, but it's my life, and it's enough. And when I see Abigail laugh or play, when I hear her call my mom, grandma, I feel something that could be peace, or at least the beginning of it. I don't know if someday I'll be able to say I completely forgave everything that happened, but I got to a point where I can live with it, where it doesn't consume me. And for me, that's enough.